The morning started with a quiet chill that hung in the air, the kind that settled into a person's bones before the sun had the chance to warm anything. He felt it as he stood at the edge of the crowded auction yard, his boots planted in dust that carried the weight of too many footsteps and too many broken hopes. He hadn't planned on coming here, not today, not with the farm sinking deeper into trouble with every passing week. But something had tugged him out of bed before dawn, something he couldn't explain. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the stubborn belief that a man had to keep trying, even when everything seemed to be slipping through his hands. The auction yard buzzed with voices, laughter, and sharp mutters exchanged between traders who looked as worn as the land around them. He kept to himself as he walked toward the pens, avoiding eye contact, avoiding conversation, avoiding anyone who might ask about the failing fields or the thinning livestock he was trying so hard to hold on to. Word traveled fast in places like this, and trouble traveled even faster. The last thing he needed was pity. Pity didn't pay debts or mend fences or feed a family. The pens held all kinds of horses. Some stood calm, ears flicking lazily. Others paced anxiously, their hooves drumming a steady beat into the ground. Buyers watched them with trained eyes, looking for strength, speed, obedience, or whatever trait they believed could earn them good money. He didn't expect to buy anything today. He barely had enough coins in his pocket to afford a simple mare, and even that would be a stretch. Still, he scanned the animals, letting himself wonder what it would feel like to find something strong enough to help turn the farm around. Then he heard the sound. A sharp crack against the wooden walls of a pen, a frantic snort. A voice shouting for people to stand back. Heads turned, murmurs rising as folks pressed in closer to see the commotion. Curiosity pulled him forward until he reached the edge of the crowd, where a few men were shaking their heads at the sight of a stallion thrashing against the boards. The horse was bigger than most, with a coat dulled by dirt and stress, but it still carried the kind of power that made a person feel small. Muscles bunched and rolled beneath skin marked by scrapes and old scars. Its eyes were dark and wild, filled with a mix of fear and something deeper, something that made the air feel tight. The stallion swung its head, teeth bared, hooves kicking out in warning. No one dared step closer except for a handler who looked seconds away from giving up. Someone muttered that the horse had been trouble from the start. Someone else said it came from a ranch that went under after a long streak of misfortune. Another voice claimed the animal had thrown every rider who tried to break it. In a place where rumors were treated like facts, each version layered on top of the last until the stallion seemed less like an animal and more like a storm no one wanted to stand near. He watched, unable to look away. There was something raw in the way the horse fought the rope, not just anger but confusion, exhaustion, maybe even a stubbornness that matched his own. He understood what it meant to feel cornered. He understood what it meant to be pushed too hard for too long. For a moment, he felt a strange pull, a quiet tug in his chest he couldn't explain. The auctioneer climbed onto the platform, wiping sweat from his forehead as he announced the start of the next bidding round. Prices had been rough lately, and everyone knew it. People were buying cheap or not buying at all. When the troubled stallion was brought to the center ring, several buyers stepped back as if the very sight of it carried bad luck. The horse jerked against the rope, nearly pulling the handler off his feet. The crowd murmured again, some amused, others irritated, a few sympathetic. But no one raised a hand to start the bidding. They all knew a horse like that could bring more loss than gain. It could injure someone, tear through fences, or hurt itself before anyone had the chance to figure out what was wrong with it. No working man wanted trouble, certainly not trouble shaped like a powerful stallion with fire in its eyes. The auctioneer tried to lighten the mood, calling out the horse's strength, its solid build, its potential if someone had the skill to train it. His voice echoed across the yard, but it didn't change the fact that people were stepping farther away, not closer. A few even laughed under their breath, saying the animal was more curse than blessing. He felt the weight of his few coins in his pocket, almost embarrassed to be considering something so impossible. He didn't have the time or energy to handle a horse like this. The farm was already demanding more than he could give. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the stallion wasn't just angry. There was something else flickering behind that wild resistance, something that caught him off guard, something that made it hard to turn away. The bidding finally began, but at such a low price that people exchanged glances, almost surprised the auctioneer had bothered. The handler tugged gently on the rope as the stallion tossed its head again, sending dirt flying. Still, no one raised a hand. The auctioneer shifted uncomfortably, lowering the price even further. It was almost insulting, the way the stallion's value shrank in the eyes of the crowd, reduced to nearly nothing. It mirrored how he felt on the worst days at the farm, when his struggles made him feel small, overlooked, dismissed. The feeling sank into him, settling like a stone. Before he realized he was doing it, his hand lifted into the air. The moment it did, a few heads turned. Some people whispered, surprised that anyone would even consider making a bid. A man nearby muttered that he must have lost his mind. Another chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. But he kept his hand steady. The auctioneer's voice brightened as he called for another offer, but no one else raised a hand. Not one. The crowd seemed content to let the farmer take the risk, to let him shoulder the burden of a horse they all believed was doomed to cause more trouble than it was worth. The auctioneer called the count once, twice. A long pause stretched as the stallion snorted and stomped, kicking up dust. Then the hammer came down with a sharp strike. He had won the troubled stallion. A strange silence washed over him. It wasn't triumph, not really. It was more like the quiet before a storm. The handler led the horse toward him, though the animal fought every step. People watched with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. He could almost hear their thoughts. They expected the horse to tear free, expected him to back out, expected the worst. As the stallion drew nearer, its eyes locked with his. For a split second, the chaos faded, replaced by something he didn't understand. It wasn't trust. It wasn't fear. It was something in between, something fragile and sharp. His pulse thudded in his ears as he reached out a slow, steady hand. But before he could touch the rope or speak a calming word, the stallion lunged, rearing up with sudden force. The handler stumbled back, losing his grip as the rope slipped free. Gasps rose from the crowd. Hoofs struck the air with terrifying power. And in that split second, he realized the horse wasn't running toward escape. It was coming straight at him. The ground trembled beneath its weight as dust swirled into the air. His breath caught as he braced himself, unsure whether the animal meant harm or was acting out of sheer panic. Either way, there was no time to run, no time to think. No time for anything except the sight of the charging stallion bearing down on him. And just as the horse reached him, something unexpected happened, something that froze the entire yard in stunned silence. The morning after he brought the troubled stallion home, the farmer rose before the sun, though his body begged him to rest a little longer. His back was stiff from years of field work, and his hands were rough enough that even the wash basin water stung. Still, he pushed himself up because he knew the farm waited for no one. He had never been a man who needed much sleep anyway. Worry kept him awake more than anything, and the weight of keeping his land, his crop, and his small world together often felt heavier than any plow he dragged behind the mule. That morning, though, worry was joined by something else, something he had not felt in a long while. Unease. The thought of the stallion pacing in the barn made him move faster, as if leaving the animal on too long could cause another problem he was not ready to face. When he stepped outside, the air carried a sharp bite. Mist hovered above the fields, drifting low enough to blur the edges of the rows he had planted in hope and harvested in exhaustion. The farm looked peaceful from the porch, the kind of calm that would make anyone believe the land cared for its owner the way he cared for it, but he knew better. Land needed constant work, and this year the harvest had not been generous. He had gone to the auction hoping to buy a workhorse, something steady, something predictable. Instead, he came home with a stallion known for trouble, a creature that had tossed more riders than most folks could remember. He had not planned it. The auction had been loud, the crowd restless, the animals shifting in their pens. He had watched buyers bid on healthy horses with bright eyes and strong legs. But when the handlers dragged out the dark stallion, fighting the rope and striking at the ground, something in the farmer stirred. People whispered that the horse had been through too much and could not be trusted. They said the stallion had belonged to someone who pushed him hard, and after that the animal trusted no one. The farmer knew he should walk away. Instead, he took one look at the horse's wild eyes and raised his hand. Now, standing in the cold morning light, he wondered if he had made the right choice. He reached the barn door and paused. He heard nothing from inside, no restless snort. No kicking boards, only silence thick enough to make his chest tighten. He pulled the door open slowly, steadying himself. The stallion stood in the far corner, head low, not in fear but in warning. Its dark coat shone even in the dim light. Its breath puffed steady clouds into the cold air. The farmer stepped inside, boots crunching against stray bits of hay. He spoke softly, though he was not sure why he felt the need. The horse flicked an ear, acknowledging his presence but making no move to approach. That was fine. The farmer had never believed life worked well when rushed. He set down the small bucket he carried and pushed fresh hay gently into the stall. The stallion watched every movement. There was a strange intelligence in its stare, something that made the farmer feel as though he was being judged, as though the horse was weighing what kind of man he was. The farmer backed away slowly, careful not to startle the animal. He did not try to reach out to it. Not yet. Trust took time, and time was something he was running out of. The debt collectors had been by twice already, each visit colder than the last. They wanted their money soon, and the farmer had little left to offer except the land he stood on. A strong workhorse would have helped him plow faster, harvest faster, maybe even earn enough to keep things steady. Instead, he had spent what little he had on a stallion that could hardly be ridden. Still, he did not regret it, not fully. Something told him there was more to the horse than its troubled past. Something told him the stallion had a purpose he could not yet see. Later in the day, after tending to the rest of the chores, he returned to the barn with a rope and a halter. He was not planning to ride the stallion. He only wanted to walk it to get it used to his presence. When he entered, the horse stood taller, muscles tightening. The farmer kept his posture relaxed, breathing slow. He knew enough about animals to understand fear had a scent, and the last thing he wanted was to give the stallion a reason to fear him. He took one slow step. The horse snorted. He waited. He took another step. The horse shifted but did not retreat. That was progress. He lifted the halter slightly so the horse could see it. He kept his voice soft as he spoke, though the horse made no sign of understanding. Patience, he reminded himself. Patience saves more than force ever will. Just as he began to move again, a loud bang echoed outside. A slamming gate, someone shouting. The stallion jerked violently, eyes wide with alarm. The farmer reacted fast, dropping the halter and stepping back out of reach. The horse reared, hoofs pounding the wood. For a moment the farmer thought the stallion might break through the stall door entirely. He stood still, letting the moment pass, giving the horse space to calm. The shouting outside got closer. The farmer recognized the voice. It was the neighbor from the next stretch of land, a man who liked to involve himself in matters that had nothing to do with him. The farmer stepped out of the stall and walked outside, closing the barn door carefully behind him. The neighbor marched over with an angry stride. He claimed he had seen something strange near the farmer's land the night before, near the fence line. He said someone had been out there with a lantern, moving along the border. He said he thought the farmer should know, though the sharp tone in his voice made it clear he was here for more than just sharing information. The farmer listened politely, but his mind drifted. Someone near his land at night was troubling news, especially now when things were fragile and uncertain. He thanked the neighbor without showing much reaction. The neighbor walked off, muttering under his breath. As the farmer turned back to the barn, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. A pull in the air, a signal that trouble was forming in the distance. His farm was at risk, his debts were growing, and now strangers were walking near his property under the cover of dark. Every piece felt connected in a way he could not yet understand. The stallion, still restless, paced behind the door. The farmer watched the barn for a long moment. It was strange how quickly the animal had become important, more important than he expected. Almost as if the stallion had been sent to him for a reason he had not yet discovered. Shadows lengthened as evening crept toward the farm. The farmer felt the land shift beneath the quiet. He felt danger pressing in from far beyond the barn. And as he stood there, staring into the dusk, he sensed that the troubles coming his way were greater than anything he had faced. Yet deep inside, he also sensed something else waiting to reveal itself. Something tied to the troubled stallion, something powerful that could change everything if he learned to understand it. The night settled thick over the farm, and the first distant howl of wind brushed across the fields. The farmer stepped back toward the barn, hand resting lightly on the door, feeling the horse's presence on the other side. He had no way of knowing that the stallion was the only thing standing between him and what approached through the darkness. He barely slept that night, not because of the cold draft blowing under the door of the small farmhouse, but because of the restless energy he felt pulsing from the barn. The stallion had not settled. Every few hours the farmer heard the sharp thud of hooves hitting wood, the scrape of a hoof against the stall floor, or the deep sound of a frustrated breath pushing the air. It was not the behavior of a simple, troubled horse. It was as if the animal was fighting something inside itself, pushing back against memories or fears that no one could guess. He lay on his back staring at the uneven ceiling boards, thinking about his failing crops, the coming frost, and the debts he could not outrun. He had not planned to win that horse. He certainly had not planned to bring home an animal everyone else avoided. Yet some quiet instinct, some push inside his chest, had made him raise his hand at the last moment. Even he could not explain it. Before dawn he lit a small lantern and walked toward the barn, the cold wrapped around him, sharp and biting. The sky still held that deep shade before first light, the kind that made familiar shapes look unsure. He paused at the barn door and listened. Nothing. For the first time since bringing the stallion home, it was silent. He slid the barn door open and stepped inside. The stallion stood at the far end of its space, head raised high, ears turned toward him, eyes glowing in the dim lantern light. The animal looked different. Not calm but alert in a way that gave the farmer a strange feeling. Almost like the horse had spent the entire night thinking, waiting. He raised the lantern higher and stepped closer. The stallion shifted but did not kick or rear. A small change, but he noticed. He reached out his hand slowly, keeping his voice steady. The horse watched him, not blinking. When he got close enough, he saw dried sweat on its coat, streaks of dust from where it had thrown itself against the stall walls earlier. He could feel the heat coming from its body. The horse had been in some kind of battle all night. As he lifted the lantern, he noticed deep scratches along the inside of the stall door. The wood was splintered, the marks fresh. He ran his fingers over the grooves. These were not simple signs of impatience. They were signs of fear. Something had triggered the stallion. Something had made it panic. Before he could study it further, the wind outside rose sharply, rattling the barn roof and sending a chill through him. The horse flinched at the sound. The farmer stepped back and exhaled slowly. The storm rolling in was early for the season. If the weather turned worse, his fields would not stand a chance. The weight of that reality pressed down on him again. He moved through the barn, checking feed, tightening loose boards, and trying to ignore the unease that kept creeping into his thoughts. Every so often he felt the stallion watching him, not in a nervous way, but with an intensity that he was not used to from any animal. It was as if the horse was studying him, trying to understand him in the same way he was trying to understand it. By midday, the wind had thickened into icy gusts that cut through his coat. He left the stallion with extra hay and hurried back to the house to fetch tools for reinforcing the barn. As he worked outside, something kept bothering him. The scratches on the stall door, the way the horse reacted to the storm, the strange silence it carried around itself. Nothing about the animal was ordinary. Hours later, as he hammered another board into place, he saw a figure walking slowly down the long dirt road toward his farm. At first, he thought it was a passerby. But the closer the figure came, the clearer it became that the person was heading straight for him. A tall man wearing a dark coat, shoulders squared, steps steady. When he reached the edge of the yard, he paused. The farmer lowered his tools and waited. The man's gaze drifted toward the barn. He did not smile, did not greet him. Instead, he asked in a low, steady voice if the farmer had purchased a stallion from the auction the day before. The farmer nodded cautiously. The man's jaw tightened. He glanced at the barn again, as if calculating something. Then he told the farmer he needed to see the horse. The request felt more like an order. The farmer shook his head. He did not owe explanations to strangers. But the man insisted that the stallion was dangerous, that the farmer should not handle it, and that it should never have been sold at auction. The farmer felt a knot form in his stomach as he asked what business the man had with the horse. The stranger hesitated. Then he said the animal had been involved in an incident on another farm and had caused damage. He did not go into detail. He avoided specifics. Something about his tone made the farmer doubt him. It felt too practiced, too rehearsed. Before the farmer could question further, a loud sound came from inside the barn, a heavy thud, then another. The stallion had started again. The man's head snapped toward the noise. His expression tightened. Without waiting for permission, he stepped forward, moving toward the barn. The farmer blocked his path. The wind grew stronger. Leaves spun across the yard. Thunder rolled in the distance. The stranger's eyes hardened as he insisted one more time that the horse was not safe. The farmer refused again. If the horse needed help, he would handle it himself. This was his land, his barn, his responsibility. The man stared at him in silence for a long moment. Then he gave a slow nod, stepped back, and warned the farmer that keeping the stallion would bring trouble. The warning did not sound like concern, it sounded like a threat. With that, the man turned and walked back down the road, disappearing into the rising storm. The farmer stood there, watching the stranger fade into the gray distance, feeling a new kind of worry settle in his chest. He had no idea who that man was or what he wanted, but his words carried enough weight to stay with him. He hurried into the barn. The stallion was pacing, muscles tight, its breath sharp and uneven. When the farmer approached, the horse stopped and raised its head, eyes fixed on the open doorway as if expecting someone else to enter. It was then the farmer realized the stallion had reacted not to the storm but to the stranger's presence. A new question formed, heavy and unwelcome. What had this horse been through before the auction? Who had handled it? What had been done to it? The man had called the horse dangerous. Yet the farmer did not see danger in the animal's eyes. He saw confusion, fear, maybe even a spark of hope. But if the stranger was telling the truth, the farmer had inherited a problem far greater than he understood. And if the stranger was lying, something even darker was hidden behind those warnings. He rested his hand against the stall door, trying to settle the pounding in his chest. For the first time, he wondered if winning the troubled stallion was going to change far more than his farm. It might change everything he believed about the quiet life he thought he was living. And as he stood there, the horse turned its head toward him, ears pricking, as if sensing that the real trouble had only just begun. The wind picked up across the open fields as the tired farmer pushed open the gate to his small yard, already feeling the weight of the day pressing down on his shoulders. He had been on his feet since before sunrise, tending to soil that had grown stubborn and dry, coaxing crops that no longer promised much, and pushing through chores that never seemed to ease. His boots carried the dust of long weeks, and his hands showed the cracks of a man who had worked harder than he ever admitted out loud. Yet he still found himself leaving home again before noon, heading toward the auction grounds with the hope that maybe something there would change the direction his life had taken. He told himself he was only going to look, only going to see the livestock and supplies being offered, but a quiet voice inside knew he was searching for more than equipment or animals. He was searching for a sign that things could turn around. The auction yard buzzed with chatter and shuffling boots as folks examined cattle, wagons and crates stacked along the fence lines. Men laughed, horses stamped the dirt, and dust swirled with every passing step. The farmer tried to blend into the crowd, though his worn coat and weary eyes gave him away as someone carrying more burdens than money. People nodded in greeting, some with sympathy, others with the easy air of those who hadn't felt luck slipping through their fingers the way he had. He kept his head low, moving slowly along the rails as the auctioneer's voice boomed from the center ring. He hadn't expected to stop. He hadn't expected to feel anything beyond simple curiosity. But when a restless stallion was led into the ring, pulling hard on the rope and tossing its head with fire in its eyes, the farmer froze in place. The horse was tall and muscular, though its coat showed signs of neglect. Its mane hung unevenly, and its hooves were rough around the edges, but there was something fierce beneath the surface. Something alive, something fighting. The crowd whispered, muttering about how troubled the animal was, how it had thrown 2 handlers already, how it wasn't worth the risk or the feed. A few laughed when the stallion jerked sideways and nearly pulled the young handler off his feet. The farmer watched quietly, studying the horse as if it were speaking without words. He didn't understand why he felt drawn to it. He had enough work waiting at home and barely enough grain for the stock he already owned. Taking in a stallion with a reputation for trouble made no sense. Yet something in the animal's struggle mirrored his own, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the 2 of them were standing in the ring together, each fighting against forces no one else saw. Bidding started low, as expected for a horse with more spirit than stability. The crowd hesitated, waiting for someone else to take the gamble. A few men joked loudly about the stallion being fit only for hauling broken fence posts, and others backed away from the rail. The farmer knew he shouldn't lift his hand. He knew the feed bill alone could tip him into trouble. But the whisper inside him pushed, a soft reminder that sometimes the right path didn't look safe at first glance. Before he could talk himself out of it, he raised his hand. The auctioneer shouted the bid and looked around for another offer. People turned toward the farmer, some surprised, others amused. No one matched the call. The hammer fell. And just like that, the tired farmer became the owner of a stallion no one else wanted. He felt the weight of the decision settle on him as he approached the animal. The handlers exchanged glances as if expecting the stallion to rear up and lash out. Instead, the horse snorted, pawed at the ground, and watched the farmer with flaring nostrils. The farmer moved slowly, speaking with low, steady words. For a moment, the stallion held still. Then its ears twitched. Something in its expression softened, although only for a breath. It was enough to let the farmer place a hand on the rope. The walk back to the farm was long and uneasy. The stallion resisted at first, jerking against the lead, testing every step. But the farmer kept a steady pace, guiding the animal across the dirt road and through the quiet fields. He tried not to think about the doubts waiting for him. He tried not to think about the cracked roof on the barn, the thin hayloft, or the tools that needed repair. Instead, he focused on the sound of hooves behind him, the sharp breaths of the stallion, and the lingering feeling that he hadn't chosen the horse by accident. It was as if the purchase had been waiting for him long before he arrived at the auction. By the time they reached the yard, the sun hung low and warm, casting long shadows over the fields. The stallion's tension hadn't fully eased, but it no longer strained at the rope. It watched the farm with cautious curiosity, as though trying to decide whether it should trust the place or bolt at the first chance. The farmer guided it into the small corral and slowly closed the gate, watching the stallion circle the enclosure in tight, restless loops. He leaned against the fence, breathing deeply and feeling the weight of the whole day pressing into his tired bones. He had no idea how he would train a troubled horse. He didn't even know if the stallion could be tamed at all. But he knew he would try. Something in the horse's fire stirred a distant spark in him, a reminder of strength he thought he had lost. As evening deepened and the sky shifted from amber to dusk, he filled a bucket with water and placed it inside the corral. The stallion watched him warily, muscles tense beneath its coat. The farmer stepped back, giving the animal space. At first, the stallion ignored the bucket, then it moved one step closer. Then another. Its breath trembled slightly, and it dipped its head to drink. The farmer turned away, trying to convince himself that this small moment was enough progress for one day. But as he walked toward the house, he heard a sudden sharp crack behind him. He spun around. The stallion had kicked at the fence, splintering one of the rails. Its eyes shone with wild light again, and the farmer's pulse jumped. He hurried back, raising his voice just enough to get the animal's attention. The stallion froze, chest heaving, tail flicking. It stared at him with a warning that felt unmistakable. Something unsettled it, something unseen but powerful enough to stir fear or fury inside the horse. The farmer scanned the yard, feeling the quiet shift into something colder. He didn't see anyone. He didn't hear anything, yet the stallion's reaction made his skin tighten with unease. The horse wasn't just restless from the long walk. Something else had triggered that sudden kick. A faint rustle drifted from the tree line near the edge of the property. The farmer stopped breathing for a moment, straining to hear it again. Nothing followed, but he knew he hadn't imagined it. The stallion backed into the far corner of the corral, watching the same direction with rigid attention. He gripped the fence rail, feeling the rough wood dig into his palm. He had thought the hardest part would be learning how to handle a troubled animal. But as he stared toward the shadowed trees and the silent yard, he sensed that buying the stallion had brought something else with it, something hidden, something waiting. And he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever lingered beyond the fence wasn't done with him yet.